Hello, my name is Nick Einstein, and welcome to 4 Critical Considerations when talking CDPs. I'm joined today by the man who coined the term CDP himself, David Raab. David, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
David is founder and CEO of the Customer Data Platform Institute, which is a vendor-neutral organization with over 10,000 members. CDPI helps organizations to make the best use of their customer data. You coined the term CDP nearly a decade ago. It was a blog post that was dated April 25th, 2013, in fact, and a lot has changed in the space since then. First-party data has literally exploded. Marketers have more first-party customer data than ever before. It's spread across more systems than ever before. And expectations to deliver highly personalized experiences are higher than they ever have been before. So maybe to kick us off, give us a little brief snapshot into the CDP market today versus 8 years ago. What has changed?
I think one thing that's changed is just the sheer number of vendors. I think our first report, which might have been 2016 when we founded the Institute, had 19 vendors in it. The latest report had 151, memory serves, and we literally keep finding new ones about once a week, it feels like. The number of vendors and then, of course, the variety of vendors has grown as well. So when we first started out, CDPs were pretty clearly systems that really just built customer profiles. And that's still my thumbnail definition of CDP. If you want 3 words to write down and remember, CDPs build profiles. That's really all they do. But what we found since then is that a lot of systems build profiles, and if they tick all the boxes that we have about what makes a CDP a proper CDP, you still have, as I said, about 150 systems. So you can have a email management system that has a proper CDP inside, or even an e-commerce system or a predictive modeling system. So there's all these huge variety of systems. And the reason that they're all CDPs is partly because they tick the boxes, they meet the requirements, but also because the vendors have decided to label them as CDPs. We'll rarely classify a system as a CDP if the vendor itself doesn't accept and actually promote that classification. So it's become a very popular category. A lot of people obviously are looking to buy CDPs, which is why vendors adopt the label. So both the supply side and demand side has grown very, very substantially.
And you bring up a good point there. There is a lot of variance in CDPs and what is a CDP and what isn't. So you talk about CDPs building profiles. What is the real definition? What does the CDPI define a CDP as? And what are the differences maybe between a CDP and a data warehouse or a data lake?
Okay, so the formal CDP Institute definition is customer data platform is packaged software that builds a persistent, unified customer database that's accessible to other systems. If you want to break that down a bit, which gets to your question about how it differs, packaged software means it's something you buy. It's not a data warehouse or a data lake that you would typically build as a custom project. Unified, persistent customer database obviously has multiple components to it, but it means that it takes in data from all sources. That's sort of what unified suggests. So it doesn't just work with some subset of data. A CRM system, for example, will work usually just with the data that the CRM users have entered into that own system. They don't usually import data from other sources. Marketing automation, pretty much the same way, except maybe it will be integrated with a CRM. Persistent means it stores the data more or less permanently, the more or less being sometimes you're not allowed to store it for a particular period of time for regulatory reasons or simply for business reasons. There's no point to storing the data, so it really stores as long as you want, as opposed, say, to a DMP, a data management platform, which traditionally at least work with cookies, and cookies you throw away after 60 or 90 days because they're simply not useful anymore, or they've been discarded by the system itself. So that's another differentiation. Or integration platforms, things like MuleSoft or Zapier or Boomi, any of those products that just move data from one place to another, but don't themselves store it permanently. And if you're not going to store it permanently, then things like identity resolution become really difficult because there's old data that you have to factor into your identity resolution that might be thrown away. And shareable with other systems, accessible to other systems, is easy enough to understand. But again, there are a lot of products, again, like things like CRM platforms or marketing suites that really are not very good at sharing with external systems. They build a database, and they may be a very fine, complete, unified, persistent database, but they really just use it for themselves. They're not designed to share it out with other systems, and that takes some special technology, or at least designed to do that. So the CDP has this unique combination of features. No one feature is absolutely unique only to the CDP. It's the combination that makes it unique, and the combination is there because that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to build those persistent, shareable profiles, where all the other systems we were just talking about, even though they store customer data, and even though they're perfectly excellent at what they do, they were designed for some other purpose, and they were therefore optimized for that purpose, which makes them not really as good at doing what a CDP does.
There is a lot of variance into kind of how CDPs were designed, right? Like some were purpose-built CDPs ground up, some built for marketers, more some built for more kind of enterprise operations, IT folks. In terms of like getting the most out of your CDP, how should organizations be thinking about kind of training and making best use of the CDP?
Well, training is a good thing. We're highly in favor of training, and many organizations skimp on training. What happens is the project runs a little over schedule, so they budgeted a month or two for training, but then of course when they land a month or two, they said, we'll just do the training after the fact. This is not a good idea. We do not recommend this. Okay, but backing up just a bit about finding the right CDP, as we say, they have all these different scopes. Some just build the profiles. Some do profiles, plus they have predictive analytics, which is a whole class of CDP vendor. Because a lot of those companies started out as predictive analytics systems, and they said, we need this unified data. They built the unified database, and by gum, they were a CDP now. Then they turned out the unified database was actually more appealing than the predictive modeling tool. And other ones have campaign management, and even, as I say, delivery or e-commerce or whatever. So the scope varies greatly, even though they all have that shared ability to build profiles, because that's, again, what makes you a CDP. Now, as to which one you need, there are two sort of big clusters, if you will. There are the systems that really focus just on the profile building. And those vendors tend to sell up into the enterprise, where the enterprise wants a unified customer profile that can be shared not just by marketing, but also by sales and service and support and operations and all the other groups. So those tend to be enterprise resources. So the companies who want that, if they're not going to build it themselves, a lot of big enterprises like to build things, but if they are going to buy one, they will buy one that's really focused on the profile building, because the other functionalities are going to be handled by departmental systems. The other big cluster of CDPs are systems that are more targeted to marketing departments. And those are the ones that have built-in campaign management and built-in predictive modeling and analytics, and maybe even, as I say, message delivery like email or web ads or whatever. Because the marketing department wants one system to do as many things as possible, especially if it's not really committed to its existing email system or predictive modeling system or whatever. So the vendors kind of tend to fall into those two big buckets. The ones that are sold to marketing departments are a little more sold to mid-tier companies than big enterprises, although plenty of big enterprises buy them. So within the many fine gradations of the market, and one of the things that we like to do around here is split the market into cute little segments. But if you're not totally obsessed with CDPs, maybe you just want to think of them as two sort of broad segments of the ones that really focus on data and are more enterprise level, and the ones that are really more for the marketing department and have a lot of marketing functions in addition. Which of those you need, of course, depends on which kind of company you are, which kind of buyer you are.
And likely the requirements for kind of training the staff and getting people up to speed varies too based on the type.
Clearly, if you're going to have an integrated campaign manager, well, maybe you want to train your marketers to use it. That's generally considered a good idea. If it's just a CDP that's going to be doing the data management bit of it, then that's more IT training, and that's who you have to train and what you have to train them in. Which doesn't mean, of course, as with any data system, that the people who are going to use the results, who are going to use the data, don't need to be trained on what's actually in there. That's, of course, a huge problem, that people look at a piece of data and they, this says it's email address. Well, then I guess I can use it for always to be the email address. Well, maybe that's really just a particular email address, or there's some other bit of data that looks like it might be one thing, but actually isn't necessarily what you think it is. So it's important to train the users on what's really in there and what's it suitable for and what it's not suitable for. Predictive modeling scores are a good example of something that might be labeled one thing, but often can be misused accidentally if you don't really understand what you're looking at.
These are pretty dynamic times when it comes to privacy and how brands and marketers are managing their customer data. International regulations, GDPR, state regulations in the US rolling out as we speak. I'm in Colorado. I think Colorado just rolled one out. There are some pretty strict requirements on how brands can handle and use their first-party data. We also have Apple and Google stepping in on the privacy front, making big changes. So I know you guys at the CDPI are laser focused on privacy. We just went through the CDPI, a real CDPI certification again this year, and you had a lot of new questions about privacy. What role does the CDP play when it comes to security and privacy, and what should our audience here be thinking about when it comes to their CDP and the usage of their customer data today?
Right. So privacy is hugely important. Certainly, the European vendors just think of GDPR as the CDP, Full Employment Act, because pretty much every company in Europe they all have to comply with GDPR. Many of them look to the CDP as the tool to do that. The reason that happens is what you have to do to deploy a CDP in many ways overlaps with what you have to do to comply with privacy regulations. So you have to find where all your customer data sits. Well, you have to do that to deploy a CDP, and you have to do that to comply with privacy regulations. You have to be able to pull that data together and give someone a look at it. Well, that's what marketers do with a CDP profile, and that's what you have to do if you have a subject access request from a person. You really should call them people, not subjects, who makes a request and says, show me all your data, which is a right under GDPR and CCPA, for example. You have to be able to keep track of all the processing that you've done. Very easy if you're doing all your processing by pulling data out of the CDP. It sits there as a choke point to make sure that data is only pulled out for appropriate reasons. You have to track consents. Well, guess what? You need a place to store that consent. CDP is the perfect place to store that consent. And as I said, then to put governance on top of the data to make sure that the use of the data is only something that is in fact consented to or otherwise justified, because consent's only one of the legal justifications for using data. So a lot of the work you have to do to comply with privacy is the work that you have to do to deploy a CDP. So it just makes total sense for the CDP to be the system that you do that in, because before that, companies typically didn't have it all in one place. So we're going to have to deploy effectively a CDP anyhow, just to comply with the privacy regs.
Let's hit one more question here before we get to the live Q&A, and this one's a biggie: build or buy. In my experience, a lot of enterprise marketing departments, marketing operations folks, IT folks believe they do have the skills and tech infrastructure to satisfy key use cases by building in-house as opposed to looking for a CDP vendor. And maybe, I don't know if that's changed over time, but what are you seeing in the marketplace as it pertains to kind of build or buy? And what advice would you have for brands and marketers who are considering building at the moment?
All right, I'm tempted to answer build or buy by saying yes, because the reality is it's really not an either or choice. Nobody goes out and builds their own computer chips. You're going to buy your computer chips. You're going to buy your computers. You're probably going to buy your computing services. You're probably going to buy an operating system and a database system. So you're going to buy a lot of stuff, even if you quote unquote build your CDP. Similarly, even if you bought a packaged CDP and everything that goes on top of it or underneath it in terms of what else we got built, you're still going to have your IT people connect the data in. There's still IT work to deploy that packaged CDP, which is effectively building, right? So it's more of a balance. Now you can go out if you're an IT department and you can buy a pipelining tool and an identity resolution tool and obviously database management tools and segmentation tools, and you can buy all those things and you can wire them together and you can construct something that functionally is the equivalent of a CDP. Now, is that the best use of your resources? Do developers have other things in their funnel that they need to get done that aren't getting done because you're off building the CDP? Now, if you needed to build a CDP that had some capability that the purchase CDPs didn't have for whatever reason, so it's really going to be unique to you and you couldn't buy it, okay, sure. At least think about building. You still have to see, do I have the resources? Do I have the capabilities? Is it the best use of my resources? There's a whole checklist of things that you want to go through before you commit to this project versus that project. But in reality, a lot of corporate IT departments don't have those resources. If they're not in an industry that's traditionally done a lot of work with customer data is tricky. It's a skill. It's an art. If you don't have that experience, then starting with the CDP is really not the place you want to learn that. So it's not black or white, but it's simply a question of what's the optimal use of my limited resources. If I can buy something that gets the job done for me, it really is silly to build it. If I can't buy it and I have to build it, then I have to look at whether I really have the skills to build it, because of course, if I don't have the skills to build it and I can't buy it, well, I guess I'm not going to have a CDP. But there's no point to biting off more than you can chew. And a lot of IT departments look at it and say, it's a database. We know how to build databases. But yes, it's a database. And, brain surgery is just like cutting open a chicken, but it's really not. You kind of got to know what you're doing or you're going to have, not a very nice piece of brain surgery.
I hear you loud and clear on that. Great stuff. David, with that, let's get into some live questions.